Look at this dip in the US because of COVID. It just went boom. How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're going to be checking out how the Netherlands accidentally moved to a 4-day work week. And I put accidental in quotes there because it shows it in parentheses there. So I don't know how they accidentally did it. But TDR News EU is the original channel. All right, so links down below for the video. Thanks for watching with me. We're gonna check it out because I always hear about the like the work-life balance and stuff being a lot better in the Netherlands, like Europe in general, not just the Netherlands. Over there, they work to live, right? Instead of live to work. Thanks for watching with me, guys. Let me switch my screen over here. All right, let's do it.
Earlier this year, Eurostat published data on the average working week across the EU for 2024. Like with most Eurostat releases, no one really noticed, but there was a pretty interesting number in there, 32.1, which is apparently how many hours the average Dutch person works, by far the lowest in the EU, and essentially equivalent to a 4-day week.
Basically.
So in this video, we're going to explain how the Netherlands accidentally moved to a 4-day week, and why it looks like it's working pretty well.
But the thing is it's not really a 4-day week. He said it's essentially equivalent to a 4-day week if you look at the average work day of being 8 hours. So probably it's a 5-day week, and they're only working like, what, 6 hours and something a day maybe? I don't know what the math would be on that, but...
Have you ever wondered how much money TLDR makes each year? Or who's
No.
funding our journalism? Well, we think transparency is super important.
Okay.
So we answer both questions in our recent video. It's linked in the description. So the first thing to say is that this didn't happen
Down there. Not my description, his. But you can find the link to his video in mine. Follow the breadcrumbs, right?
suddenly. Rather, it's the culmination of a long-running trend that apparently started sometime in the mid-80s. Before then, the Dutch were about as likely as anyone else to work part-time, with about 6% of working men and 22% of working women in part-time employment.
Okay.
But by 1990, this figure had risen to 15% for men and 36% for women, and by 1996 it had risen to 16% for men, the highest figure in the OECD, and 38% for women, behind Sweden and the UK, but well above the OECD average. So what happened in the 80s to provoke this shift?
Yeah.
Well, broadly speaking, there were two factors at play. First, Dutch unions accepted a reduction in working hours for their membership to cope with the economic downturn that hit Europe in the 70s and early 80s. This wasn't the case in most other European countries, where, generally speaking, unions instead tried to protect as many full-time jobs as they could, even if that meant more redundancies. This was largely because the Dutch economy, and especially Dutch industry, had a particularly rough time in the 70s and early 80s. Quite a lot of this has to do with a phenomenon that's since become known as Dutch disease. In short, the Netherlands began producing and exporting lots of natural gas in the mid-70s, when energy prices were rising worldwide. While this was great news,
But it looks like it's starting to go down some, for sure, since 2005-ish. It's kind of on a downward trend, although the downward trend looks like it might be slowing, perhaps to shoot back up, who knows?
gas in the mid-70s, when energy prices were rising worldwide. While this was great news for anyone in the gas industry, it was bad news for anyone employed in basically any other industry.
Okay.
Strong gas exports put upwards pressure on the Dutch currency, the guilder, which made the Netherlands' other exports uncompetitive, leading to widespread bankruptcies and job losses. The Netherlands then suffered a particularly brutal recession in the early 80s, with GDP contracting for 8 consecutive quarters between 1981 and 1983. With exports collapsing and the domestic economy in the doldrums, Dutch unions accepted that they needed to do something drastic. In November 1982, as part of the so-called Wassenaar Agreement with Ruud Lubber's new right-wing government, the unions agreed to both lower wages and accept fewer working hours in order to keep Dutch industry afloat. This worked remarkably well, and in the subsequent economic boom, a lot of the new jobs created were part-time.
So like other countries are kind of like just still forcing and enforcing and like the full-time work and stuff, it sounds like, and incentivizing like with the unions and stuff. So basically because of a economic downward spiral, I guess, like like a bad spot in the economy, they're like, okay, well, we're just gonna also try to protect like part-time jobs. I don't really know how how unions really work beyond the idea of like it's a thing set up to help protect workers and stuff. I don't know.
The second factor was the entrance of women into the Dutch workforce. For a whole load of complicated cultural reasons, women moved into the workforce remarkably late in the Netherlands. But the rise of part-time jobs in the 80s acted as a sort of release valve, allowing women with children or other caring responsibilities to flood into the labour market.
Well, and if it was right around that time too, then it's like it makes sense because if the economy was kind of going downhill, then that's why a lot of the women are like, all right, well, I guess we're just gonna have to go start working. Same thing happened after like during World War II or like the Depression or something here. I can't remember, but like it happened here a long time ago. Well before the 80s in this country, but
The transformation was pretty astonishing. In the 70s, the female labour participation rate in the Netherlands was less than 30%, the lowest in the OECD. But by the 90s, it had risen to over 50%, well above the OECD average.
what's the OECD? Hmm. Because it shows United Kingdom, Netherlands, OECD.
You get the idea. The Dutch shift to part-time work apparently
Wait a
began.
minute. Is it other economic country development? I don't know if that was a good guess or not. OECD, maybe?
Of the OECD average. You get the idea. The Dutch shift to part-time work apparently began in the 80s, with both a supply-side element, in other words, a rise in part-time job creation after the unions accepted a reduction in working hours, and a demand-side element. In other words, there were lots of unemployed but well-educated Dutch women who were ready for part-time work. This seemed to work remarkably well. The Dutch economy boomed throughout the 80s and 90s, with strong GDP growth, low unemployment, and balanced budgets. It was at about this time that economists started talking about the Dutch 1.5 earner model to describe households where one partner worked full-time and the other worked part-time. A consensus quickly developed amongst the Dutch political class that this 1.5 earner model was working pretty well, not least because of its dramatic effect on overall employment. And in the 90s, a series of new laws were passed to make it easier for part-time workers. In 1993, a new law extended the minimum wage, which was previously restricted to those working at least 13 hours a week, to all part-time workers. And in 1990,
What do you mean? So minimum wage was only, so you had to work 13 or more hours a week to get a minimum wage. So if you worked less than that, they could pay you whatever. Is that what it is?
In 1993, a new law extended the minimum wage, which was previously restricted to those working at least 13 hours a week,
Huh.
to all part-time workers. And in 1994, another law obliged employers to include part-time employees in pension schemes. In 1996, the Dutch Parliament passed the
Interesting.
Working Hours Act, which included a provision obligating employers to consider the care duties of employees, essentially making it easier for full-time employees to move to part-time work. And in 2000, they passed the Part-Time Employment Act as part of the Framework Work and Care Act, which gave employees the right to change their working hours.
And then wasn't it like the year after that that they switched to the euro? They got rid of the guilder, right? Was it 2001? I can't remember.
Finally, this was updated in 2016 by the Flexible Working Act, which gives employees the right to adjust not just their hours, but also when and where they work. This legislation turbocharged the pre-existing trend towards part-time employment, which is why the Netherlands has
Well, yeah, but like in the Netherlands, everything over there is like contract related though. So it works way different than like here in the United States and stuff. You have to sign like a work contract and it's kind of confusing. I don't know a lot about it. Maybe I should watch some more videos on that actually.
had the highest incidence of part-time employment in the developed world for years now. For context, according to World Bank data, in 2023, over 60% of Dutch employees worked part-time,
Okay.
compared to an average of 31% in the OECD and 36% in the EU. Part-time work is still far more common with women, but Dutch men are also still more likely than any of their international peers to work part-time.
Where's the US? So we got Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Japan, Australia, UK, Ireland, Italy, Belgium, New Zealand, Mexico, Norway, Denmark, OECD. So that is that an actual country? Canada, South Korea, France, Spain, Finland, Turkey, Estonia, Sweden, Greece, Slovenia, Czechia, Portugal, Latvia, Poland, Lithuania, Hungary, and Slovakia. Don't see. Okay, are they just comparing it to the Nope. New Zealand and Mexico and stuff's on there. That's not in Europe. Hey Google. When talking about a list of countries, what exactly is the OECD?
The OECD, or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is an intergovernmental organization with 38 member countries that collaborate to promote economic growth, sustainable development, and world trade. Its members are committed to democracy and market economies, and they use the OECD as a forum to compare policies and find solutions to common problems.
I wonder why it's listed as an individual country. Like like you got, I mean, I didn't count it, but like maybe 20, 30 countries on here, and OECD's listed as though it's a country in itself. Interesting. And I wonder why the US, is it just the part-time employment rate is lower because more people's working full-time or just unemployed altogether here? I don't know.
This is the main reason that, on average, the Dutch work such short weeks, with the latest Eurostat data finding that the average Dutch work week comes in at just 32 hours.
What else do we got here? Let me
With the latest Eurostat
get it
data finding
populated.
that the average...
There we go. All right. So nothing's really showing over 40. Whereas the average work, what is the average work hours here? What is the average work hours in the United States?
The average number of work hours in the United States can vary depending on the data source and what is being measured, e.g., all workers, full-time workers only, or a specific industry. However, recent data generally shows the average work week to be around 34 to 35 hours. As of August 2025, the average work week for all employees in the private sector was 34.2 hours. For full-time employed people, the average is closer to a traditional 40-hour work week, with the Bureau of Labor Statistics reporting they worked an average of 8.4 hours on a weekday they worked in 2024. While the traditional American work week is often considered to be 40 hours, 5 8-hour days, this average can be skewed by the inclusion of part-time workers and by the fact that many salaried employees, especially in white-collar jobs, often work more than 40 hours per week.
Yeah, I would say a lot of like if you have a full-time job, you're working a lot more than 40 hours normally. Not always, depends on what it is. Of course, then you got all your part-time people that kind of, so the average is still 34 something. That's not terrible, actually. I don't know if those numbers are correct though, so we can't go by that. I don't know. AI is kind of weird sometimes, and I don't know if they pulled the right numbers, the same numbers that they're pulling here. So take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
average Dutch work week comes in at just 32 hours, the lowest in the EU by quite some distance, and well below the EU average of 36 hours. Of course, this number is brought down by all the part-time workers. It doesn't mean, for instance, that everyone is working 4 8-hour days.
Right.
But as part-time work has become ever more popular in the Netherlands, 4-day weeks have indeed become very common. So how's this working out for them? Well, to be honest, it looks like it's going pretty great.
I used to work 4 8-hour days at a factory, but it was like 12-hour days or 10-hour days. I can't remember. You worked more than the regular 8 hours though. But the thing about it is like you would get the 3-day weekend, but most of the time you really wouldn't because they would pull like this whole mandatory overtime thing on Friday. So like you'd end up coming in on Friday anyways. And you already got your 40 hours or whatever it was by Thursday. So then when you work another 8 hours on Friday, now you're close to 50 hours on the week or more. Depends on how much other overtime they make you do during the week at the factories. That's why I'm so glad I don't work in a factory no more. That sucks. Like we all like the stuff that comes from the factories when we buy products. So like obviously there has to be somebody that's there making them, and we all appreciate it.
The Netherlands has a remarkably high employment rate. According to OECD data, 82% of working age people in the Netherlands were in employment at the end of 2024.
Look at this dip in the US because of COVID. It just went boom. There's a dip everywhere, sure, a little dip, but dang, what happened? And it's going back down. Like it didn't even get up to where it was before, and it's going back down. What is going on here?
2% of working age people in the Netherlands were in employment at the end of 2024, compared with 75% in the UK and 69% in France. Nor does this seem to have hurt the Dutch economy. The Netherlands is an incredibly rich country, measured by GDP per capita, largely because Dutch workers. The Netherlands is an incredibly rich country, measured by.
I mean, I knew Luxembourg was a rich country. I knew Norway was a rich country. So GDP per capita. So Ireland, Switzerland, Singapore, Iceland doing really good. Denmark, Qatar, nice.
By GDP per capita, largely because Dutch workers are quite literally some of the most productive in the world, which might have something to do with the fact that they're not as burnt out as the rest of us. And finally, families seem to appreciate it. Dutch kids are quite literally the happiest in the world, presumably at least in part because they get to spend more time with their parents. Now, when you're diving into complicated topics such as this, it's quite easy to get caught up in what you know without even missing a beat. But what about the stories you don't see? Or what happens when the stories you do see are purposefully leaving out information to try and sway your thinking?
They do that.
Thankfully, our sponsor this week, Ground News, are experts at helping with just that.
I knew it was going to be ground news. Okay, so that's the end of it. It's just the ground news. Well, you already know about ground news. You've seen the ads before. There's your QR code. Get you that 40% off. This guy gets his sponsor bit put in the video. Extra advertisement for him. So 4-day work week, guys. I don't think it's just 4 days though. I think it's just an average, maybe 6 hours, a little over 6 hours a day. On average, of course, that would be if you're looking at it 5 days. But again, you got the full time and you got part time. So if you factor it all in together, and there's gonna be a lot of people working only 3 days a week. Who knows? Thanks for watching with me though. You guys have a super fun, awesome day. Hit like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye.